Good Friday morning. Welcome, friends, to this week's episode of Finding God in the Dark podcast. My name is Don Stevens,
And I'm Jonathan Campbell.
and our film this week is the documentary, well, one of the 2024, 25, how do they date that? I don't know.
25, yeah.
25 Oscar-nominated documentary films
Yeah.
called Sugarcane.
Yeah.
It is, okay. Let me see if I can pull up the quick the IMDb.
Information.
Yeah. Well, I mean it's directed by where is that? Uh, Directed by Emily Cassie and Julian Brave Noisecat. Julian, his grandfather is kind of one of the main
Okay.
people in it.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It is not a, like I said, it's a documentary. So,
yeah.
these people, they use their real names in the film.
Yeah.
Um, it is about, this is a tough one. An investigation into abuse and missing children at an Indian residential school sparks a reckoning on the nearby Sugarcane Reserve, which is this is all in Canada.
Yeah.
And so folks may have heard about this story about unmarked graves and that sort of thing from these schools going back generations.
Yeah.
Um, this is Jonathan and I texted a little bit about this. This is an emotionally intense film. It
Yes.
is not an easy watch, and that's not because they build the drama with music or anything like that. It is just genuine, raw emotion from
So
people.
some of the most powerful scenes are just literally stuck on someone's face, waiting for them to respond.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's not. This is not a popcorn flick.
No.
This is an intense film.
Yeah.
Um, it particularly when you find that you get to the point where Julian, the director, is also in the film,
Yeah.
and he's trying to reconcile a relationship with his grandfather.
But there's no his father and his grandmother.
That's right, his father and his grandmother. And we find that his father is the only child, illegitimate child fathered in this school that
That
survived.
survived. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't killed.
That wasn't, yeah, literally killed by, well, I mean, this is horrific. Some of the stuff that's in this
Yes.
is really horrific. I mean, you're talking about schools run by the Catholic Church where children were abused emotionally and sexually
Yeah.
and
And physically.
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 And that the byproduct, particularly of those sexual abuses, was burned in the incinerators.
Yes.
And I don't want to get into any more detail than that. It's really some, you know, in a very real sense, we talked several weeks back about Speak No Evil. You want to talk about the reality of evil in the world?
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. This one's
Yeah.
got.
This is one of those films. If it doesn't make you mad, I don't understand. I don't understand who you are as a human being.
Yeah, make you mad or make you cry, one or the
Yeah,
other. I mean, it's a really tough film.
yeah.
But you know what? That being said, as hard as it is to watch, um, films like this are important.
Oh, absolutely.
I think films like this are really important, really um, demand an audience,
Mm.
because sometimes, particularly in Western civilization in America, we love to focus on how good we've got it, and things are so great, and we're just great people, and
Yeah,
God loves us, and all that stuff is great, but there's reality there too.
yeah,
And we have to pull back the curtain and see what's really going on.
yeah.
And I think this film does that in a very real sense. So
Yeah.
where do you want to start, John?
Well, I feel like as pastors, a good place to start, or a difficult place to start, but a place we need to start is abuse in the church.
Yeah.
And I know our Catholic brothers and sisters have got have gotten the largest kind of critique about sexual abuse and physical abuse in their parishes and in their churches. But this is a problem that cuts across religious background. Uh, Unfortunately, because of the status that church leaders often get with other human beings in terms of how they're looked and how they're treated, uh, unfortunately, a lot of people that are dealing with mental health issues around abuse end up trying to engage with the church, whether it be as a priest or clergy person, or as a youth leader, or as a Sunday school teacher. And
Mhm.
that happens across the board in every religious context you can think of. And the Catholic Church has gotten a lot of crap for it, and rightly so. They mishandled it. I mean, there's just no way around that. But our church, the Methodist Church, has mishandled it. There were a lot of, I mean, it was not. I'm not going to speak to any names, but I'm sure Don had a similar situations. But I remember when I first started 20 years ago in this conference, hearing about. I didn't hear about anybody that was having sexual relationships with minors, but I heard about clergy who had that. The joke was that every church they went to, they had an affair, and all the conference did was just move them to another church, and that's wrong in the same way that moving a priest that is molesting children is wrong. It's when someone has a, a, a tendency to use their power and authority to sexually get involved with people, they should not be clergy and they should not be leaders in the church, period.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that part up, okay? That we often, the running gag is priests,
Yeah.
priests molested, but the Catholic Church has no monopoly on this.
No.
It is something and what it boils down to, I think, something that, my wife being a therapist, of course,
Yeah.
I come at it slightly different
Yeah.
tack. What it boils down to is hurt people,
Yes.
and oftentimes, I mean, I think it's one of the things we do right in the Methodist Church is, doing all of the psychic vows and all of this stuff that we go through, and we feel like it's a trudgery when we're doing it,
Yeah.
but or drudgery, not a trud. What is a trudgery? Anyway, we feel like it's this drudgery when we're doing it.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of value in like understanding your own baggage and
Yeah.
understanding your own the places where you could fall into something that's going to bring you down, really,
Yeah. I mean,
and hurt other people, which you don't want to do.
I think it's important for all of us to know that as sexual beings, we all have weaknesses in how we would express our sexuality, and we all have situations that could open us to vulnerable places where we misuse our power or misuse our influence over somebody. And yeah, to be aware of that and to be cognizant of your responsibility and your ethical standards, and also building in safeguards so you're not put in compromising positions. All of that stuff is stuff that we all need to work on and we all need to deal with.
You touched on another key word there in the idea of power, because I think a lot of people don't realize it or don't think about the fact that really, as clergy, we have a lot more power than we think we have,
Yes.
particularly in individual, interpersonal type of relationships. People you speak to their pastors with a lot of deference and listen to what you had to say, and that's very easily abused if that's something you're going to do. You could do it simplistically.
Yeah.
um
And
so
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, and again, I don't want to always make it seem like it's because there are people that literally have this issue and they go to places like churches so that they can take advantage of people. But there also are a lot of people that get in over their heads because they aren't thinking through their issues. They aren't thinking through the fact that this person is coming to me in a very vulnerable place. I'm helping them out. I'm helping them get through this. We're bonding on this emotional level. And then realize that that emotional level of bonding can sometimes turn into what you think is a sexual relationship or sexual desire, but that it's usually fueled by the emotional connection, not the dynamic that usually happens in a dating relationship.
I think one of the wisest things that was ever said to me when I first came into this process, and it was one of my first candidacy mentors, um, said to me, we take the shepherd, Jesus as a shepherd, as a model.
Yeah,
And so if you're going to take that model, understand the shepherd does not feed off his own flock.
yeah,
The shepherd doesn't get his needs met, his or her needs met
yeah,
by their own flock. So
yeah,
the people that you're ministering to are people that you take care of. They're not people that take care of you, you know,
yeah,
um, at least in an emotional sense or a relational sense, Now we've struggled with that. Even in our own conference, we struggle with that. We talked a little bit about, some of the policies that have come around and things like that out of situational related policies that have come up in our own conference
yeah,
around that. Because as you said, we're sexual beings. We're built for relationship. And it's hard if you're I mean, in a very real sense, it's easier for me, right? I have a wife. I don't, and I'm 100% faithful to my wife. I wouldn't even anything like that wouldn't cross my mind, you
yeah,
know. So I'm comfortable. You're right. You still gotta have the safeguards. You still gotta,
yeah,
if I'm gonna meet somebody in this office, we leave the door open, that kind of
yeah,
thing. But there's also the side of me that's like, that's just it, it's not going to happen. From my perspective, it's just not going to happen.
yeah,
I've had situations where I felt like somebody was, a lady in the church was kind of getting a little too close. And so I told my wife, I said, if you see her talking to me, I need you to come right over and stand next to me, you know,
yeah,
because it's just because, you
yeah.
know. Um, so yeah, that's a challenging thing. And you're right as well in that it's not just clergy.
Mhm.
It really is. I think it's a universal challenge.
Well, you see it with the Boy Scouts. There were
Right.
clearly people who decided that they would deal with um, their mental health, sexual desires by becoming scoutmasters and becoming uh, people that worked with the scouts to pick off vulnerable young boys. I mean that did happen. So
But yeah. So anyway, yeah, this is a certainly an issue. I mean, it's in this film.
mhm,
You know, it's a significant part of what goes on in this film is, uncovering that angle and, people doing, for instance, genealogical research
yeah,
and finding that they're, genetically related to this, father
yeah,
this or,
yeah,
brother that.
yeah.
Um, which, yeah. It's funny because it was these children were taken. I mean, the families, the parents of these children sent them to these
They
schools.
they at least how it worked in Canada, and it worked similarly in Alaska, and I'm guessing other places too. The state would force it. They would
Okay.
basically say you had to send your kid to this. And again, I think to kind of shift, but it was powerful to think that the wording that was used was we're going to use these schools to handle the Indian
Indian
problem.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just like, that's
And
not a healthy place to start. Like,
and in a sense, I mean, if they were, I mean, this maybe this is just where my mind goes here. But if these priests were sexually abusing these little girls, were they handling the Indian problem by diluting their genetics? I mean,
Well, that's what I mean. The term that was used was get rid of the Indian problem, and I think it's interesting. And granted, human beings have always done this, but I wonder if anybody at the high level of the Canadian government ever sat back and went, what do we mean when we say get rid of? Because that seems to imply that these people aren't human, they're not of value to us as a society, and we really want them to go away. And you saw a lot of it because there was clearly a force feeding of Christianity, a force feeding of essentially a Euro, be like a white European, be like a well, I guess you could say be like a white Canadian, and so dress like a white Canadian, play the games of a white Canadian, learn the language of a white Canadian, and then of course become a Christian, even though Christians obviously are more than just white people, but the brand that they got was American Euro American Christianity, and it was like
definitely a
become
Western
yeah
Christianity. Yeah.
become like it was essentially become like us, and we're going to make you like us. And what's so sad about that is it directly cuts against this idea of love of neighbor. You're called to love your neighbor, and you're called to love them as they are. You're not called to force them to be like you before you love them. And yet, that's what was going on. This attempt to essentially, it was an attempt to kill their culture and try to replace it with a white Canadian culture. That was basically what the attempt was.
And I mean, thankfully, you see, I think it's early on in the film that the culture of these native people, these indigenous people, has survived,
Yeah.
at least in some form. Um, but there is a real dynamic, even still in the modern day in this film. There's a real dynamic here between that ancient culture and the pull of modernity, and how they're, you
Yeah.
know, these people don't live the way they used to. They don't dress the way they used to, So it's like these, in some way, shape, or form, these residential schools have had that effect.
Yeah, you get this. I thought an interesting. It was a scene that went by really fast, but when you were saying that, it made me think that scene where that one father is is showing his, I believe, fishing and pulling. He had a net, was pulling them out of the water,
Mhm.
and was cutting the heads off and preparing them. And you could tell that this 9 or 10 year old that was the first time they'd ever experienced that. And you kind of step back and realize if this was the culture the way it was, that kid would have been doing it since they were probably three. They would have been fishing
Exactly.
with dad. And so this kind of wow, this is what we do. Or I didn't realize until you said it, but I didn't realize that the director was in the film, but even though you see him first off by he's participating in these competitions, these dance competitions, these kind of celebrations of native culture competitions, and so in your mind you're thinking, oh, he knows all about this stuff, he's really engaged. What I thought was fascinating is throughout the movie how he asks his mom and he asks his dad and he asks his grandmother, how you say this, how do you say this in our language?
Right.
How do you?
In the
And you
language.
realize, oh, he's not. He's gotten some of it, but he hasn't gotten all of it. Um, yeah, whenever I've spent time around native people, you realize how much they've lost in sense of who they are and their culture, and they can never get it back completely because it's been cut away in a lot of ways, and how deeply sad that is. You know, I don't know about you. This movie made me so angry at clergy that they would do this. Not only that they would they would sexually assault these young women. But when these young women got pregnant, that they would participate in killing the child. It to me, I just like how can you decide to give your life to serving the church and serving your community, and then just keep doubling down on these horrible mistakes? Like I understand we're all human, but there's this part of me that's like, why didn't like there's 1,000 times you should have pulled yourself off this path. Why didn't you? You know?
Yeah. Well, I will admit I don't think that I was really angry so much as just sad.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that's like, this is just wrong. But we've heard so much of this abuse at this
yeah,
point, and again, particularly from the Catholic Church, but
yeah,
again, that's something that is across denominational lines.
yeah,
Um, that it just really, for me, my heart went out for the victims more
yeah.
than anything else. I was just I just broken. I mean, it's the scene where they went up into the barn,
Oh yeah,
and this barn is where, for those who haven't seen it, these children were taken from the school up into the barn and, tied up and beaten and left
yeah.
there to, for days on end, and they would carve their names and the dates in the side of the barn. Um,
It was almost a way of them saying, "This is me. I was here."
yeah.
And it made me think, in light of another comment that was made in the movie, the at least one of the schools, they went between two or three schools, and sometimes I understand why, but it kind of got lost. Like I wasn't sure what school we were talking about sometimes.
Right.
But one of the schools chose to call everybody by a number, not a name.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, them writing their name down in this barn was their attempt to steal back their identity. It was their attempt to say, no, I am here. I am of worth. You know, it was just a blatant defilement of the idea of the Imago Dei, the idea that we're all made in the image of God. And choosing to call people by numbers when they have names, stripping them of a primary identity, is just your way of not dealing with them as a person. It's allowing you to make them subhuman so you don't really have to consider how you treat them.
I mean, yeah, did we learn nothing from Auschwitz?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah, it was, yeah. So I think for me, at least, one of the um, one of the really challenging parts, because if if you let it, I think the emotionality of this film can really drag you down,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And you can be angry, or you
Yep.
can be really sad. Um, and for me, as particularly as clergy and as a Christian, I have to ask that question: what's next?
Yeah.
Right? What do I do about it? How do I respond to it?
Yeah.
And I come back to something that is, wow, hey, we're Methodists, a very Wesleyan idea
Mhm.
that John Wesley talked about, your faith being two sides of the same coin. I think we may have talked about this before a little bit,
Probably.
right?
Sure.
And that there is that personal holiness, the Bible study, the worship, the things that you do for you, but that there's also this other side, the social holiness, the
Yeah.
things that you do for others.
Yeah.
And that a well-rounded Christian and a well-rounded church does both of those things.
Yeah.
Um, and so, in light of this film, maybe there's not anything that we can do, particularly about a situation that happened in Canada, right? But how do I respond in my own context
Yeah.
to
I mean, there
that
were
sort of
there
thing?
were 409 of these schools in America. So my guess is there's probably the ramifications of one of them was probably close to us more closely than we would like to think about.
That's probably true. Yeah.
One thing that maybe you can do when you edit it is you could link to the Methodist Church does one of our special Sundays is raising money for the Native American fund that we have, and so maybe you could link to that page so people could donate if they wanted to. Um,
If I can find it, I will put it right
yeah,
down here.
we could you could at least probably find the advance number, and the advance
Yeah.
number is what you would put on your check when you sent it to um, send it into your. You can just send it into your Methodist church, and you can put on the check the advance number, and then we can give
Yeah, the
that
advanced
money
special
to.
number.
Yeah.
And that
Um,
can be forwarded to the conference treasurer and they won't get
yeah.
it where it needs to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, I mean, there's, to me, that's the next step question,
Yeah.
right? How do I, so, my personal holiness is giving me that feeling like this is
Yeah.
wrong. I
Yeah.
understand this biblically, this is, we've, there's a sin here.
Yes.
And then now I've got to turn that coin over
Yeah.
and what do I do with it?
Yeah.
How do I address what's happened?
My instinct would be that what I would encourage people, if they really want to engage with this topic of this issue, is probably look for ways to start by having conversations with Native American tribes in your area.
Right.
And I can't remember the tribe there's a couple of tribes in New Jersey, but they're
The Lenni Lenape, the
yeah,
Powhatan, I know those two are
yeah.
in New Jersey.
You can I would encourage people to engage with those tribes first and just try to see if there's an event that's coming up that you could attend, if there's more information, do they do information nights, that kind of stuff, and start there, because to me what I get worried about sometimes is sending people off on a problem without actually engaging first the people who deal with the problem and are affected by the problem. To me, you want to listen to, lack of a better term, the victims of the problem and learn from them what they need, how they think the problem should be addressed, and then try to work alongside them to to address it.
Right. Because there's a really wonderful thing that you're pointing to right there, Jonathan, is that you're giving people agency, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
You're investing them into an ongoing type of recovery
Yeah.
what has become, I mean, very obvious in this film, generational trauma,
Yeah.
right? This is something that has affected several generations of people. The grandmother
Yeah.
who sent her daughter
Yeah.
to this school, the daughter who's passed away, but
Yeah.
the father of the director was,
Yeah.
like we said earlier, the only child that survived escaped the incinerator,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and
And
I
even the
yeah.
grandson who directed the film, and
Yeah, they're all
there's a
doing.
whole reconciliation arc in this film with him and his father and his grandmother.
One, and they still struggle with it. I don't know about you, but to me, one of the most powerful pieces of this was that, and I was glad they did it off camera. You just heard the words of it, the conversation, but not to say that the mother who abandoned her child didn't do something wrong. She did, but she was most likely raped by a clergy person, no one that would have taken her seriously. They make that very clear that this stuff was swept under the rug. And yet, probably 50, 60, 70 years later, she's still struggling with this. She's beating herself up. And it was so sad to me to think that there didn't seem to be any kind of sense for her, that I was taken advantage of and I was abused and I was mistreated. And yes, I shouldn't have done what I did, but it didn't happen in a vacuum, like,
Yeah.
and it reminded me how the damage we do to people spirals out, and sometimes for the rest of their lives, and we don't even realize that they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the thought I had that the grandmother,
Yeah.
she is still 60, 70 years later, still experiencing and grieving over something that she had no control over.
Yeah.
And then the father is still scarred from being the only child that escaped the incinerator and the abandonment of his mother, the grandmother.
Yeah.
And then the son is like there's this whole story arc in the film about reconciliation between him and his father and his grandmother,
Yeah.
and all of it comes out of this generational trauma. And again,
Yeah.
hurt people.
People. Yeah.
It's I mean, this film is a perfect demonstration of that idea, um, which makes it a really powerful watch.
Yeah. It is.
Even if I think it might be for some folks, it might be hard to continue to pay attention because there are a lot of these kind of slow scenes where, like the
Yeah.
fishing scene you talked about,
Mhm.
or scenes where you're just looking at the countryside for a minute, that kind of thing, and people might lose interest. But I think you have to understand that you're getting a whole. Um, they're kind of trying to give you a step back from the tapestry and get the whole picture view.
Well, I think especially as I'll be blunt here. I think especially as white folks, a lot of times we lose sight of what impact it had when we kind of ran roughshod over these people in their lives. And we kind of we moved them around. We gave them land and we took it back. We gave them land and we took it back. And then, we set up schools for them so they could learn to be like us. I don't think sometimes we recognize kind of the weight of that kind of just running over people and the weight and the damage that does to a community and how that community tries to piece itself together and try to make sense of itself in this new reality and because I think whiteness oftentimes is kind of treated as it's the normal thing and everything else that isn't white is abnormal, that I think if you if you are white, sometimes you forget that, and because you don't none of us get a really good vantage point of ourselves outside of our cultural context. And so I think sometimes as white folks, we forget sometimes that we kind of live in a world where how we see the world seems to be normal, and everything that isn't us is treated as abnormal. But for these folks, they had lives, they had language, they had religion, they had all this stuff that wasn't like ours, and all they got for generations was pressure to give all that up and to take on something else.
Yeah.
And that just does damage. It just does.
And let's be honest, in a lot of ways, we still do that in the church today
Oh yeah,
because, in a lot of our churches, people, maybe we've said this before, people want the church to grow, but they want it to grow with more people just like us.
just like that. Yeah.
And
People that like it the same way I do, that do it the same way I do,
yeah,
that that want to have service at 9 o'clock, that want to do traditional worship or want to have the praise band,
yeah.
yeah, and that's normal. That's a normal human response, but it doesn't make for the healthiest community. And I think that's what we need to recognize is part of what Christianity teaches is that you have to push against those normal instincts sometimes because those normal instincts don't make healthy communities.
Wow.
There we go.
So, friends, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We've had some challenges with technology during this one. You'll probably see a couple of jump cuts because the internet dropped out and came back, and then we ran out of time. So,
Try to do it really cool so it's like, hi, hi.
all of a sudden, we both turned into max headroom. See, now I'm dating myself.
You are.
Anyway, so friends, if you are so inclined as to watch Sugarcane, it is an intense movie. Be aware of that. It's not an easy film to watch, but we do find some serious value in what you can take out of that film.
Yep.
And for next week, we are watching a film called Flow. Now, this is one of the films that's nominated for Best Animated Picture of the
And best
year.
foreign film too. So,
Yeah, and Best Foreign Film. It is animated. The protagonist of the film, the star of the film, is a cat,
mhm.
and there is no dialogue. So, uh, we'll see where that goes. I'm kind of excited about seeing that one just
Yep,
because I saw an interview with the director, and it seems like he was really excited about making the film. So,
yep, yep.
when you see that kind of passion going into something, I think you want to see what that looks like, you know.
Absolutely.
So next week's film is Flow. Uh, our discussion today, at least some of it's probably going to show up in our sermons this Sunday because we are pairing the podcast with the sermons this 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So keep an eye out for that. I did give folks a heads up. I said if you want a preview of what I'm going to say on Sunday, you should watch Friday morning.
Yeah, and if you're in the Lacey area, we are showing them at our church. So just go to our website, laceyumc.org, and you can get information about when we're showing the films.
Amen. Amen. So until next week, friends, keep on finding God in the dark. We will see you all next week.
Bye.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.